Today's webinar on the top 100 cosmetic companies ESG reporting trends. We will get started in just a few moments while we still have some more people coming in. In the meantime, please review our housekeeping guidelines. Okay, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to introduce today's webinar for the top 100 cosmetic companies in ESG reporting trends. My name is Lawrence Muchnick. I am the National Sales Manager for Personal Care and Cosmetics for SGS. And pretty much what I handle is the certifications and audits. And we'll talk about that much later into the webinar. I wanted to go over the agenda real quick. We have an About SGS. We have the top 100 cosmetics, which include reporting, third-party assurance, governance bodies, most common environmental and social topics, most common topics, third-party assurances, and then what's next for the cosmetic industry in Q&A. Okay. Our speakers today is Adam Hames. He is our ESG Director. And Harsh Vasoya, he's our lead assurer of ESG and sustainability. SGS is the world's leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification body. We have over 97,000 employees in over 2,650 locations around the globe. And expertise across global industry sectors. And we pretty much provide assistance and expertise with global support and services that cater to all industries. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Adam to speak about ESG. Here you go, Adam.
Thanks, Lawrence. And thanks to everybody for showing up today. Sometimes we like to show, we are one of the largest tech companies in the world, and people know us for testing, inspection, and boots on the ground auditors around the world. They might not know as much that we have deep knowledge on sustainability, and we have for a very long time. It's embedded in our company values and operations from the top down, board and CEO all the way down to every individual gets trained. And that's because we've been doing this for quite some time, and we've actually sat at the table of most of the standards and frameworks that have been created over the past 30 years. So we have a long history in sustainability, as well as getting recognized for our own participation in the rankings and rating agencies that we help our clients with. And so we score very well in our industry and just globally as a company. And we'd like to just bring your attention to that so that if you know us for one thing, hopefully that you know that our brand SGS is very strong in ESG and sustainability. I'm going to hand it over to Harsh to give a talk to kind of brief us on the background of how we went about this research that we're about to share with you. And so I'll let him take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. And welcome, everyone. Here we are going to talk about the top 100 cosmetic industries by revenue. And, the entire approach and the focus that we have presented in this follows in the triple bottom line of ESG. And whereas the focus was majorly to cover the different trends that companies are focusing on, or the different trends that people or the top management should be looking at, and giving a complete way forward for the same. So that is what we are going to look for this entire research, and we have tried to collaborate for the different companies where we think that the trends would look like, and that is what we are going to present today. So just looking at the quick preview of what the different 100 companies of cosmetics look like. So these are the different companies that we have looked by revenue, which are doing business in Canada and US. So many of these companies do have registered their business as a private or a public company in the stock exchanges, and that is where the entire list or the participating companies in the entire research would be contributing to the final statistics that we'll be looking forward. And while we are doing this, I want to understand from all the attendees that we have today, in the room, to understand that what is your story behind it. So if I may, can I take a quick poll here and understand, has your company published an annual ESG or sustainability report? And you can use this polling to answer yes, no, or I don't know if you're not the representing member of the sustainability forum in your organization, but understanding basis your awareness, we'll have a quick poll here to understand what is your company's take on ESG. We have already half of the attendants respond to the question, and I would request all the other members as well, if you are able to see the poll, you can select basis the level of awareness you have and the kind of report that the organization present. And I'll give more last 5 seconds to respond. All right, let's understand the scoring of the same. Right. So as we see, from the statistics that many of the companies do report on the ESG or sustainability, and many of the companies are currently participating members don't know or have not initiated the journey on the ESG. So this entire analysis would be very helpful for every one of you to understand what are the current trends or what are the steps that needs to be undertaken to start your journey or to have maturity in the same. So at this stage, I would hand it over to Adam again to give a brief context on ESG and sustainability definitions.
Thank you, Harsh. And as we go into the next, the bit of stats to say from the research, I just wanted to make sure we're all clear on how SGS is defining these things so that we don't get caught in the trap of, very commonly, and I joked about this yesterday, someone says sustainability, and you say, well, do you have 15 minutes to talk about what you actually mean by that? Just because it gets thrown around pretty loosely. But we're using ESG in a very kind of pure financial materiality sense, where it came from the public sphere. We do a whole training on this, but it's really coming from at least a 50-year financial responsibility movement since the Great Depression. And ESG is really, it stands for 3 specific things: environmental, social, and governance, and their material disclosures for publicly traded companies, although now that's bleeding into other things. But that's where it came from, and it is purely about financial materiality. What are the impacts of environmental and social issues on businesses? Not the other way around, which is impact materiality, which is often associated, which we'll use here to be kind of like a step beyond ESG, which is what is the business's social and environmental impacts on the world and the society. And so those 2 things are very important, but they're not exactly the same. And often they're called double materiality if you're using them together. Now, there's some really helpful alignment, even though some people argue that frameworks and standards are very confusing. You can draw a really nice line between the investor-driven financial materiality and ESG frameworks and standards, with integrated reporting, SASB, and TCFD being the most common and most popular, kind of joining forces about 5 years ago in the Value Reporting Foundation. And only last year, all that work was absorbed into IFRS. And they've just released something called S1 and S2 to really simplify the reporting process for businesses specifically who want to use financial materiality as their basis. While below, if you want to do double materiality, there's still kind of 2 separate things: GRI, which is aligning in the sense that they're doing sector standards, but they're maintaining their double materiality, adding impact materiality. And then the UN Sustainable Development Goals are very much originally targeted at governments and states and regions, municipalities, but the SDG impact piece, which is being launched very soon, is trying to remedy that and have more tools and standards and management systems for businesses. But there is a very clear delineation that you can decide which playing field you want to be in when it comes to those frameworks and standards. And then I'll hand it. So given that question, I will turn it over to Harsh.
Yes, thank you, Adam. And as Adam said, that when it comes to the ESG or sustainability reporting, people define it differently, and how they represent the information to their different stakeholder groups also varies a lot. And that is what we also observed while conducting the research, that majority of the companies do report on ESG or sustainability, and the most common way of disclosure was found out to be through their website or web page. And while using this entire objective of reporting to your different stakeholder groups, we observe that when we look at the total number of companies reporting on it was significantly high. But when it comes to what kind of reporting that they are using, or the framework that they are using to report the information, there the entire bifurcation played very different scenario. So majority of the companies are using websites to disclose the information on their environmental KPIs or social or governance initiatives. There are very few companies who are focusing on using the frameworks like GRI, SASB, TCFD, or SDGs to report on very specific KPIs or parameters and draft it in a form of report, which can be used in a circulation for specific stakeholder groups like investors, shareholders, or rating agencies to gain a specific attention from the audience. But yes, what we observed was majority of the companies are still focusing on using their websites to disclose the information. And we will see throughout the presentation that how all the different statistics are playing a major role in defining this kind of statistics, that if the companies are doing more of website disclosures versus report disclosures, how the entire statistics changes in the overall platform. So, while doing this, one of the things that we always observe, that once you have a report in place, it's always, there's a lot of work and efforts and priorities which go in developing that. And one of the major thing that we always discuss in sustainability is that it is always a top-down approach. And while it's a top-down approach, we always understand or always try to ask one question, that is your senior management or is your board of directors also aligned to your ESG and sustainability activities that your organization is playing? And that is where in the reporting, we always have that one of the steps that involve your top management or involve your senior management to have your sustainability driven very smoothly across the organization. And that is where we would like to understand, from the different participants as well, that has your company established a senior level governance body for ESG and sustainability? So I will again, have a quick 15-20 seconds, question here, that is your company have or appointed a senior level governance committee body or a member who is representing from the top management, who is completely focused on ESG, or who have a part role in driving the ESG across the organization? All right, last 5 seconds. Okay, from the people who have able to respond on this specific question, it also requires some level of awareness in this. Majority of the companies do say that currently they have not appointed a senior level governance body or aligned a specific person's roles or responsibilities towards ESG, and that could be something that a major game changer in when you're starting to plan on the ESG, or you want to have your current activities gone to the next level of appointing a senior management or a person in a senior responsibilities to have your ESG driven, because top-down approach really works well while having an ESG driven in the organization. And to also understand that how the entire phased manner ESG approach can be also understand in better way, I would hand it over to Adam to explain the maturity cycle of ESG in the organization.
Thank you, Harsh. So we teach this 5-step ESG cycle to all organizations, but it's really about maturity of going through 5 very delineated steps, or I should say, yes, steps in the cycle. The first time you go through it, we tell people that it might take 2-3 years, but usually, especially if you get into formal reporting with an annual report, it's almost always on an annualized basis, whatever your fiscal year is. But you can see that it makes sense. There's awareness, raising your own competency about issues, trends, and strategies, setting priorities based on that awareness of what you know is typically considered a materiality assessment, stakeholder engagement, and identifying risks and opportunities, and then using those priorities to actually build a strategy for the company. And this is why senior leaders are the ones that need to do it, because that strategy should fit with the business strategy. So it includes visions, KPIs, goals, plans, and then you get into execution with daily management of these material topics through initiatives, projects, and quality, and then actual reporting, management, and performance over time. And it can be very formal or informal, but some sort of storytelling of what you're doing. And then the reason why we talk about governance body, setting the company strategy, is because that's exactly what it is. It's really hard to execute something if senior leadership is not bought into it and not driving the ship. And that tends to be board, C-suite, VPs, and directors, often a single ESG professional who's sort of the coordinator of all of this, and often lead counsel, especially if you have legal and compliance issues that are top of mind. It's not always considered a senior ESG committee. It could be called the Sustainability Working Group or something, but it is a senior ESG committee of high-level leaders, whereas you can kind of see the different segregation of duties when you're in the different execution and reporting phases. So that's why we talk about governance as a very important piece, and that's why investors really push on governance issues. And this is just a quick snapshot of a report in the cosmetics industry from a very big company that they actually disclose, this is very common, what their actual committee structure is, board level and operationally, and how they measure or how they manage and govern and make big picture strategic decisions for their ESG KPIs and strategies. So I will hand this now back to Harsh for the data.
Thank you, Adam. And as we also saw in the poll, that majority of the companies who are currently reporting on ESG, they do have this kind of governance system in place. But many of the companies also are somewhere not disclosing the information or keeping internal, or they don't have assigned the ESG governance body internally, or a specific committee or responsible person in it. And the statistics also reflect the same, where majority of the companies who have not disclosed that information or don't have a specific person or a structured committee in place, but the committees who have responded or who have disclosed that information is also still falls in the plane where we initially reflected that many of the companies do also report as an ESG with multiple frameworks aligned with combined of ESG using SDGs or GRI or SASB standards. And those companies have disclosed the information on having a sustainability governance committee where they also have all of them board level oversight as well. And if we compare those companies report or disclosure, definitely it is much more comprehensive rather than just having that disclosure on the website. And that is where,
Harsh, I want to hop in because I just realized that what we're saying is correct. This chart, for some reason, must be tied to something incorrect, but the yes is the 68%. When we send this email back out with the slide deck, we'll have that corrected. But this is absolutely, because we poured through the data, 68% is in the yes category, 32% is in the no. So something changed there. Just not to confuse our listeners.
Yes. And thanks, Adam, for noticing that. And yes, I just looked at the statistics, and 68% are the companies who are disclosing the information, and out of disclosing companies, 68% are reporting on the governance, sustainability governance. So yes, the statement still stands correct for all the different team members who are reporting on the ESG. Definitely they have a ESG committee in place and have a board level oversight. But yes, there are still many companies who have to assign a specific person or a committee member or structured framework to understand what kind of activities they can prioritize, increase the awareness in the organization, so that they can have priorities listed for a top-down approach. And when you have this kind of governance committee in place, one of the major things that come up in the discussion is that what are our top priority areas in the triple bottom line. And now we'll be looking at very specific bottom line discussions when starting with from environmental topics. That if I want to understand that what are your top three environmental topics for your organization from the reporting members or even from non-reporting members, what would be the top three environmental topics which are important for your organization and which are very much should be, if conducted a materiality exercise, would form the top list of the activities that the top management would be interested in from the organization's point of view. So what would be those top three topics for you?
And it's okay if you don't know what your organization feels. If you just want to give us your personal opinion, you are the one on the webinar today. So it's just your best professional, informed opinion on your company. I threw in energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity. We're a lot of travel, mostly, because we're in the auditing, consulting, testing, and inspection. So mostly we're just traveling around the world. So we don't have as much like water use and packaging waste and things like that for SGS.
I'll give 5 more seconds. All right, from all the different participants responded on this specific topic, the statistics says that the top areas that companies are focusing upon or they think that would make the top of the list in their organizations are material sourcing, packaging and waste, and energy use. And I'm not surprised, coming this kind of result from the cosmetic sector, that these are the three topics are very much crucial as well from the industrial operations view and also from the customer's point of view. So, this statistic is something that I was honestly expecting. And from this point, let's talk about when we have this kind of topics, more specific discussions would be what kind of KPIs that companies are looking at or what kind of targets that they're looking at. Because once you have defined the top three topics that are important to your organization, the next step would be defining the targets as well, that what kind of targets would you be disclosing upon and what kind of areas that you will be prioritizing. So at this point, I would like to hand over to Adam to discuss more on the targets and the initiatives.
Thank you. I'm just going to open up another poll really quick, and it's broad, so you can have multiple environmental material topics that are environmental, but do you have any targets set in those? You might not know, but a target could be qualitative. It could be more descriptive. I think in any sense of assurance or rating agencies or frameworks and standards, they always encourage you to start with qualitative, but then they really suggest quantitative. So putting almost like a SMART goal, you want a specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so something to look at is if you have any of those material topics that you just chose from the previous question, have you set a target or a measurable goal that you hope to achieve? And maybe it's only internally. Definitely that's also a starting point if you want to kind of baby step in. Internal feedback is always better than external feedback, takes some risks. But whether you have an external or internal target is the question. And I know we have several SGS, kind of as the nature of what we believe, but also what we do for a living. You can go look at our integrated report, and we have a ton of detail on both our environmental and social KPIs. So I'll give you about 4 more seconds, and then we will look at the results. So we have a large number, the majority have those targets. So if you, that's a really good thing. And I think we're gonna see some of that reflected in the results of the research as well. But it's also common to not know, because unless you've published a report or you're on the team that handles that, like a data owner for the environmental topics, you won't know. So don't feel bad there. And just this is a sampling of the types. These are just examples. I'm not going to go in detail on all of them, but these are samples of what we saw when we looked at the 100 companies that we were researching. Big picture above the dotted line are some broad. They cover both environmental and social, but EcoVadis and FTSE for good were mentioned a lot on the left under materials and waste. REACH compliance, true as a zero waste certification, the UN SDG number 12. Then there's on energy, the Renewable Energy 100 group, that's commitment to 100% renewable energy, and number 7 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Also in climate, we had science-based targets. I know CDP was also listed, and then the 13, UN SDG 13 for climate action, and then the Alliance for Water Stewardship is a certification program, as well as the number 6, clean water and sanitation. So those are not the only ones, but those are some good examples of ways to measure performance in different categories. And now I will pass it to Harsh to tell us what the research showed.
Thank you, Adam. And as we got the polls as well, I'm happy to show that this is something that also reflected in the analysis of the entire top 100 research, and that many of the companies always have a tendency to report on the environmental KPIs, and that is one of the reasons why stakeholders or investors or different internal stakeholders as well always have this kind of intent to report on the environmental uptake of the organization's operations. And what we observed that most common topics that were also represented on their either website or the report were material sourcing and waste management were the most common topics that were people reporting on the activities, initiatives, or targets. And the most common targets that people are reporting is on the energy and GHG emissions, and which is definitely aligned with their operations, but also with the global goals or the targets that currently the entire organizations or at a state level or national level or every individual is focusing upon. And when we talk about this kind of reporting on KPIs or targets, majority of the companies who are reporting in this space have chosen to report on the environmental KPIs, wherein the 94% of the companies who are reporting is a subset from the companies who are disclosing their ESG information either on website or report using different frameworks. Out of those reporting companies, 94% have chosen to report on the environmental KPIs. And while they are reporting on this environmental KPIs, we see the maximum number of companies are choosing material sourcing, packaging and waste, energy use, GHG emissions as their most common topics to report upon and give more and more details about their initiatives or targets to their stakeholders. But when we see at the same time the biodiversity and water use is something that people are reporting, or they are still trying to report on different KPIs, but there is a lesser tendency to report on these areas, whereas compared to different sectors who are reporting more on this. And even the targets is reported much less in this specific parameters. But yes, there are many companies who are choosing to report on the environmental KPIs. But yes, the uptake would be, while you're reporting on KPIs, people are still trying to have their emerging trends mapped out to take specific priority areas and have a target attached to that reporting.
One thing I'd throw out, because we often get this question, is why are targets higher? If you would think the targets might align with the KPIs, but energy use and greenhouse gas emissions they're just more standard, like having a quick reduction in energy use by kilowatt hours or by intensity, or just aligning with the science-based targets from the Paris Treaty. They're just easily adoptable targets, whereas material sourcing and packaging and waste can be more complex. And so it's not always as clear. You want to do better, but it's not as easy to just adopt sort of an off-the-shelf approach because it's more complexity. So that's one thing that's interesting just about this chart. We'll see this way more dramatically. I mention it because you'll see it much more dramatically in the next section.
Right. And that is where, moving from, we have talked about the governance aspect where we need to have a top to down approach to have a specific person, who is dedicated towards different KPIs. And when we have this kind of trend in environmental, let's look at the third pillar of the ESG and understand what kind of social topics and targets people are looking at. So before starting, let's discuss about the top 3 social topics that you would think that are important from your organization or from your perspective, if you would start reporting on the same.
And I think some of these, if you're struggling to find where to put, because these are kind of broad categorical, but everything with employees is typically occupational health and safety. Human rights tends to be in the supply chain. It's not that you don't have human rights issues, but we're in the North America and region, and usually we're talking about human rights violations in other countries through our supply chain. Product and health safety can mean a lot of things. It can be the chemicals used inside of the product. It can be, that's more like avoiding risky things, substituting out for risky things, or just the health, health attributes, actually adding positive health attributes that are measurable within your products. But it has two kind of portions to it. DEI, data privacy, most of those are pretty straightforward. We deal with a lot of data privacy because we're a giant company that gets people's data, and we have to be confidential with our clients. And then training and education seems pretty straightforward. If you have another, which is obviously welcome, we put it in the bottom, please type that in the chat or in the Q&A box, just so you can tell us what that other category was for you.
Sure. Now, looking at the statistics, and if we see the statistics, the majority of the companies do believe that product health and safety, diversity and equal opportunity, and training and education are the top 3 issues which they would be looking at. And if we talk similarly in the terms of what kind of topics companies are looking at with the targets, Adam, I'll hand it over to you to discuss on the same and take it forward.
Yep, thank you, Harsh. And similar question, just setting targets, and we mentioned this too, but we'd love to see just how I'm going to click yes, because SGS has social targets, but it's that there is a difficulty. We like to say, like in environmental, it's really easy to measure stuff, but you have to be very artful and conscious when you start measuring people or groups of people. And so it is more of an art, and you want to be very delicate and not diminish human beings down to kilowatt hours and not treat them the same way. If I said that clearly, you still want to find very measurable things that are indicative, but you don't want to lose sight on the humanity, I would say. So I think that just trying to point to that makes it harder, or at least more delicate, when companies go about trying to set social targets. And some social targets, like in DEI, are actually illegal, and you're not allowed to. Those are prohibited by law. And so it's just making sure that you're aware. And so we do often see that it is harder. So I just want to throw that out there if you've experienced it. And it's also okay not to know, because again, if your company has not published a report, the only way to really know about those targets is for internal communications, or to personally be on the team, or be a data owner for that particular KPI. So I'll give it about 5 more seconds. And we've got a lot of, this is great to have social targets, 71.4%, a little bit on the nose and a little on the I don't knows. That's perfectly fine and acceptable. And now let's take a look at what the top 100 companies of research showed, and I'll pass it to Hart. Oh, nope, I forgot. I was going to give some examples. Similarly, we just want to give some examples. This is not everything. But above the dotted line are the broader that cover both environmental and social. But people are using EcoVadis and FTSE for good, those programs, to measure multiple KPIs and grade themselves, as well as things like cruelty-free, Leaping Bunny approved, life on land, SDG 15. The EDGE certification, this not to be confused with the Green Building EDGE certification. This is the workforce development, gender equality, the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. Gender equality is also the 5th SDG. Certified ISO, things like 45001, which is occupational health and safety, and the SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. the ILO, the UN Global Compact on reduced inequalities and human rights in the supply chain, as well as data privacy, ISO 27001. So that's a sampling of some examples of the types of social topics and targets and the tools people use to measure that. So I'll give it over to Harsh.
Thank you, Adam. And just like environmental reporting KPIs and targets, here also we saw that majority of the companies are also reporting on the social KPIs and targets. But here the graph is little different, from the environmental one and more dramatic one. Here, the majority of the social KPI driving factor was product health and safety, as we can see. And here in this specific parameter, companies are talking about what are the different areas where they are making the customers aware on their cruelty-free product, how the product is, having certified towards vegan or which is organic in nature, and how it can help all the different customer base to take a conscious call on the different activities that they are doing to have a safe product, and which is also very at the same time healthy product. So majority of the social KPIs was, driving factor was product health and safety. But however, there are many companies who are also reporting on their diversity and equal opportunity, because we are in the world where, this is currently respected a lot, and companies are taking a lot of efforts and initiatives to represent all the different cultures that they have in their organizations, or the different people origin, and the targets or the efforts that they are taking to have it more open opportunity platforms. At the same time, what we saw on the different on the target side was majority of the companies are talking about human rights and the training targets, where they are specifically discussing on what kind of effort they are ensuring to have no targets towards no cruelty, or having targets towards not employing or discriminating towards any of the members of the organization, or at the same time not employing any of the child labor or forced labor, and having policies and targets towards that, and having a proper governance and the grievance mechanism to have a constant reporting and evaluation. And to have that, they have targets which are also linked towards the training and awareness in the entire organizations, which are not only talking about human rights, but across the different social KPIs. One very interesting thing that we observed, that not companies are not focusing upon the data privacy targets specifically. There are more policies and reporting on number of breaches, but we were expecting that maybe companies would be reporting on targets such as zero breach, but yes, they are currently considering the data privacy as their business operations and business as usual requirement, which is more towards either mandatory or voluntary, but it's more to do with how they are maintaining their data privacy with their customer information as well as employee information, rather than having a target in place. So it was a very dramatic graph, as Adam said, to understand and to learn from. And that is where we wanted to understand, from all the different stakeholders today present in the organization, from representing from different companies, when we have this kind of reporting on all the triple bottom line, where we have seen the governance, where companies are reporting on having their responsibilities assigned or not assigned, or having reporting on different KPIs on environmental and social indicators. The one of the very important question that every senior management that I have been part of the meeting, they always ask is that, is the information going in the public domain? If yes, has any third party assured this information or no? So, having this kind of question always raise many eyebrows that, have we checked it internally? Were the data owners in place, or were there, review mechanism internally? So let me put this question, across the board, and understand that, are your companies, or are you aware of your company taking and third-party assurance for the information that you are presenting in the organization in the public domain? Or yes, no, or I don't know. For us personally, we believe that for any information which goes in the public domain should be assured, because it brings in a lot of accuracy. It brings in a lot of completeness aspect, which increases the confidence level of your different stakeholder group.
And I'll throw out there too that in the greenhouse gas, specifically, one of the most common KPIs that gets the most third-party assurance is climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Often you might hear it called greenhouse gas verification. It's just the language is differently. It's coming from an ISO perspective versus if you're doing a full report, sometimes coming from like a CPA perspective, and a slightly different standard. They play well together. But if you've heard of ISO greenhouse gas verification, whether it's for an organization or a project or a product, that is also considered third-party assurance of your data. So that would be a yes as well.
Giving 5 more seconds and before we can discuss on the results.
Yep. And I clicked yes for us because we have to.
Yeah.
And we believe in it because it's what we do.
All right. So when we look at the different results here, we see that many of the companies are still not seeking or looking at the third-party assurance for their ESG report or the data. Either it could be presented in the form of report or website. And there are around 30% of the companies who are looking at the ESG report where when it goes to the public domain, taking a full assurance. When we talk about taking the assurance, many of the companies who are not seeking the assurance, it would be more useful to them as well to understand that when we talk about the ESG assurance, there are always different levels on which are presented by different standards. And what specifically, if we talk about what many of the companies are using to take the assurance is IHC 3000 certified assurance statements. When we talk about this specific assurance level, one companies it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of breather to understand that what is your current organization's capacity and appetite to undertake the assurance, where it ranges from different KPIs to the full report using different frameworks, and limited and reasonable assurance are the two different levels on which you can take the assurance. Now, if we start and if we compare, when you can start in the very first year is KPI assurance with limited level. The review is moderate level of review where the evidence are still reviewed, but the final statement which you will see would always give a negative opinion or the declaration which would state that we have reviewed the information but nothing has come to our notice to not believe that this kind of information is not correct. So that is what something would sound similar to this kind of statement. But as you mature on the reporting, gathering information as well as collecting the evidence, and if you move from left to right, which is from including more and more KPIs and finally having that entire report ready for the assurance. And if when you move from limited to reasonable assurance, the high level assurance would look like where all the different KPIs are assured across the report using a specific framework. The entire report is assured using a framework like, let's say, GRI, which is widely used framework reporting framework. And all the different KPIs would be going through the highest level of evidence review, the backtracking of the evidence for each of the different areas. And that is where the entire declaration would come out to be a positive declaration that we have reviewed every KPI and every aspect using the specific framework and standards, and which will be very useful for all the different stakeholder groups.
I'll throw in here, because I should mention it, it's, for different reasons, we have something called pre-assurance for reports, but we also have often like a gap analysis for greenhouse gas verification. It's basically an abbreviated version that's used for two different reasons. It's cost effective, and we don't close any of the findings, but it does give people like a 4 to 6 month. It's either taken as a 4 to 6 month precursor to a full engagement, or sometimes smaller companies who have no plans of getting third-party assurance, they like it because it's a cost-effective way to have a third party look at their system, but it's not going to deliver an opinion statement or a verification certificate, anything like that. It just stops short, and it's more looking at processes, standard operating procedures, data collection methodologies, calculation, but it's not confirming the final number and accuracy, and it's not producing a certificate or an opinion statement. So there is something kind of before this, but it's not considered full third-party assurance. But there are layers to this that you can use as an approach.
Thank you, Adam. And while we are discussing at different levels of ESG assurance and what kind of people have adopted to different areas based on their level of awareness or their maturity, let's take a look at the statistics. So, as we also got in the poll, we also observed the similar thing in while taking the top 100 companies analysis, that majority of the companies are still not looking at third-party assurance, and the reason being that the information is still on their website, and which is not properly drafted in a way that they have the backup information for each of the evidence, which can be verified through a very specific process or structured process, or they have that information in place, but currently they are not seeking to have a full report level or a KPI level assurance. But the companies who are reporting or who have that kind of a process internally built and taking a third party assurance, we saw that limited level is the most common one. And the basic difference between the limited and the reasonable is the level of maturity or the level of evidence that we review, and the number of KPIs that we review is different. And the reasonable has much more rigor to it, much more efforts and elevation which is required, whereas the limited assurance give you a little more flexibility to choose the KPIs from, to have a specific KPIs which are the top priority for your stakeholders to choose from and have that assured before it goes to the final report. And the combined option that very few of the companies are practicing have a mixed of both limited and reasonable level of assurance, where specific KPIs like scope 1 emissions or scope 2 emissions or the entire GHG emissions are subjected to the reasonable assurance, where they need much more comprehensive study and the final assessment to be done, to be submitted to either their investor groups or submitted to the rating indices like CDP or Sustainalytics or MSCI, to have that kind of assessment done and get that score for their different platforms that they are participating into. But otherwise, limited assurance was a very common practice. And one of a very specific question we always get while having those pre-assurance or an assurance discussions, that how many KPIs should we select, or how many KPIs should we conduct the assurance from? And there is no specific answer to that, because when we also saw the average 7.4 KPIs, which ranges from different companies are reporting from 5 to 10 to 12 KPIs, which are subjected to assurance. The number of KPIs that they are reporting on is much larger than that, because none of the companies are taking full report assurance. Barely there are very few are taking full report assurance, but the companies who are taking KPI assurance have chosen very specific KPIs in which they believe they have maturity, they have completeness and accuracy built in over the years, and they are ready to have that report assurance done. So when you're looking at the specific results of this statistics, there are very few companies who are taking assurance, but the companies who are taking assurance have chosen limited assurance with specific number of KPIs. And at this stage, I will again hand it over to Adam to discuss on the overall next steps for the companies who are either want to understand to take it to the next level of their reporting, or want to start their reporting. So what would the steps look like?
Thank you, Harsh. And really, we can just summarize, this is one slide for what we've seen. If you wanted to take leadership practices from this, if you want to be a leader in the industry, you would be establishing a governance body to prioritize and manage your material ESG topics, measure and disclose on material topics on your website and an annual report, align to reporting frameworks, one or more, it's up to you, but there are the most popular were SDGs, SASB, GRI, and TCFD. We did kind of color code those to show that SASB and TCFD are very investor driven. GRI and SDGs are very kind of public good, double materiality. They also align very internationally with things like CSRD coming out of Europe. But then at least consider KPIs and targets for the top environmental topics in the industry: material sourcing, packaging and waste, energy management, greenhouse gas emissions. And then at least consider KPIs and targets for the most common social topics: product health and safety, diversity and equal opportunity, occupational health and safety, human rights. I will point out one more time just the dramatic, I think, chart that we saw where targets were set. And I think outside forces are saying that human rights obviously is often in the supply chain, but very few were reporting KPIs. And so that's just the reality, is the difficulty of tracking things in your supply chain. And that is a very real problem. And that's something to get involved in across industry and use tools and industry association support, see what your peers are doing. But that was the most dramatic thing that we saw that was unexpected, but easily explainable when we saw those charts. And then at least consider third-party assurance for a minimum number of critical KPIs. If you're choosing material topics, and the definition of that is it's material to your business, then it is worth third-party assurance. So at least consider a small number of your KPIs that you think are the most important ones. And then just as you go on your journey, consider that there are stages of that journey. SGS can help you not do everything, but we do a lot. And so if you're just trying to build competency early on, we have great trainings, both in ESG and sustainability, also in greenhouse gas specifically. But then in the execution phase, we have versions of a materiality assessment called the gap analysis. We do mapping of stakeholders and things like that to help you prioritize. And if you're just doing greenhouse gas, we have greenhouse gas accounting, CDP advisory, SBTI advisory. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, there's a spot check. It's more cost effective. It's called pre-assurance in the assurance world for a full report, or a greenhouse gas gap analysis if you're talking about a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And you can do those separately and never do third-party assurance, or you can do them as a lead-in to an assurance to make sure that you're going to get the results you want. You don't get surprised, but there's KPI assurance, limited or reasonable, that we start out, and then there's full sustainability report assurance with those frameworks, as well as greenhouse gas verification. So wherever you're at on your journey, if we can help, we'd love to talk with you and reach out to Lawrence after this. And then just to show an example of our training is that earlier slide from the very beginning when we showed the 3 stages, like the senior ESG committee. We have an ESG course that's called the Foundation for Everyone. The strategy for leadership course is really for those senior leaders who are doing strategy for the company. Execution for implementation, which is the doers, and then the reporting for communications. That's not only internal communications, marketing, legal, investor relations, compliance, things like that. The next series comes out publicly in February. But if you want a private course, we can also do those. We have a similar greenhouse gas set of courses that are actually being taught today and next week. So that's probably why we don't have them in here today. But if you check out SGS Academy, we have really great training to get you started. And then I'll hand it over to Lawrence to close down.
Thank you, Adam, and Harsh. That was wonderful. Thank you for your time and providing us that information. I want to thank everybody for joining today's webinar. We are set up for a Q&A. So if any questions you have, please submit them and we'll ask them live here. Or if not, you could certainly email us and we'll be able to provide those answers to you via email. Here we have some information about our social pages, our email pages, our website. If you click on that training QR code, it'll bring you to our training for ESG, and you can also see all the wonderful training that we have through ESG and SGS and all the other cosmetics and every other industry we have to offer there. How did we do? We're going to be providing you a survey for you to fill out on your thoughts on today's webinar, along with an email that will come out to you with a recording of this webinar so you can review and share across your organization. So I'm just going to give it just a couple more moments here on Q&A, see if any questions come up, and then we'll go from there. I must say, Adam, you know, I do like a lot of trade shows within the cosmetic and personal care industry, and we get so many questions on ESG. It's such a big, big topic. And, you know, I noticed EcoVadis, you're doing something like a workshop around this coming soon. You want to speak on that real quick? Just, I mean, 'cause I know even the cosmetic industry and all the other industry, EcoVadis is huge. So what do you got for us coming up?
November 21st, we've got a 4-hour Boost Your EcoVadis Score workshop. That is true. It's on our SGS Academy page. You can also email us and we'll tell you. But it's really about sifting through the tons of reports that they have. And it's a great platform. We don't have a preference over any platform, but we help on all of them. But we're really talking about road mapping strategies and how to not just chase points, but how to build a 5+ year plan that's going to not maintain, but improve your score and do it year over year. And I'm curious, because you mentioned, I know we go to some, what are some of the upcoming cosmetics or conferences you're going to be at?
So we have Cosmoprof coming up in January, so that's a pretty big one. I just did the SCC Long Beach one that just passed, and it was a terrific show. Lots of people, lots of questions in regards to the audits and certifications that we do, and also ESG. We have a lot more coming up around the pike around SCC. We have one in New York. We have another one coming up with them as well. But we'll definitely keep you posted. Everyone, please keep your eyes on our social pages where we're going to be providing you all this great content and a lot more of other webinars that we have coming, trade shows that we have coming within the next year, 2024. Other than that, Adam, do you have anything you want to leave us with before we close here?
Just thanks, Harsh, for doing a ton of great research. And thanks to everybody for taking your time to come out and join us. I hope that it was helpful. And I hope that if you have additional questions after digesting some of this, that you reach out to us via email, reach out to Lawrence, reach out to any of us. Check out our training site. We'd love to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. Harsh, thank you for joining and providing us the information today. And everyone, have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.